Welcome to my creative castle. Yes, I do love yarn. I do love to knit and crochet, and mostly that's what my channel's about. But I also call it my creative castle because I have to be creative not just with my yarn and my knitting and crochet, but with life in general, and especially in the kitchen. Because if you're new to my channel and you don't know yet, I was born legally blind, completely colorblind. Now I'm not totally blind, but I am too blind to drive. And I live a few miles even from a bus stop. So it's pretty rare that I have the opportunity to go to the store, get things like eggs and fresh fruit, fresh produce, that kind of thing. So I really have to get creative in the way that I cook. I have to mostly try to use shelf-stable things that I get from Amazon. And I do love to bake. I used to do a lot of that when I lived in Portland. I could walk to the Trader Joe's and the Whole Foods. I was getting fresh produce all the time. And so I still have that love in me. But now we gotta do things a little bit differently. But one of the things that I used to love to make in the fall, the late summer, was a pear upside down cake with like a caramel sauce. And of course I had fresh pears. And if you have fresh pears, please use fresh pears, right? Probably 2 to 4 fresh pears. You want them pretty ripe, pretty soft. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know how this is gonna work out with canned pears. It might not work out at all. This video might never see the internet. I don't know. But the first thing that we're gonna need, we are gonna use a cake mix today. We're gonna use a spice cake mix. Along with your spice cake mix, of course, you're gonna mix your water, your oil, and your eggs. And as somebody who doesn't drive, who lives miles from town, I don't have fresh eggs. So we're gonna bake these today. But these are like prepper products. I buy a lot of prepper products. If you don't drive because of visual impairment or any other disability, you might want to look into prepper products because they can be really handy to have on hand. You know, in case you can't have a ride or transportation to the store for a while. And of course, if you live in areas where you might have natural disasters or things, I live in an area where we have lots of wildfires, our highways can get closed, and you might not have access to the store. So I buy a lot of prepper products. And Auguson Farms is one of the companies that does them. And they have these dried whole egg powder. So we're gonna use that. We're gonna have to get a little bit creative because of course they use the 2 eggs, which is a 1/3 cup of powder, a 1/3 cup of warm water, and of course we need 3 for our cake mix. So we gotta get a little creative. So we're gonna do that, and then if you have fresh pears, that would be a good thing. We don't. So we're gonna use some sliced canned pears, and then on top of that, we're gonna go ahead and make our sauce. So the first thing we're gonna do is heat up our oven to 350 degrees. So as somebody who's visually impaired, just a second, I will come back and talk to you all. I talk in a lot of my videos about how to make appliances accessible. Now I have a really old stove, so I actually still got an old dial on it, but if you do have a flat panel stove or microwave, you can put braille. I have braille on my flat panel microwave. There's a short on my YouTube channel about that. If you don't read braille, you can just put a piece of tape on there. I have a really old dial, so guess what? We just drilled holes at the 200, the 300, the 400 mark on my dial so I can feel where those are at. So at 350, I know I want it in between that 2nd and 3rd little hole on my knob. So to make our caramel sauce, we're going to use a small little saucepan. We're going to do a 1/2 of a stick of butter, which I believe, let's see, 1/2 a stick of butter, what would that be? Like, oh, you know what we're going to do also? We're going to go ahead and line our pans with parchment paper. I'm going to do 2 little 9-inch pans for mine. That's what we're going to use today, the little cake pans. And I've already got one of them done. I'm going to put them on little baking trays as well, just to decrease spillage. And I've already lined one of my cake pans. These are just your simple round cake pans. And these don't have to be perfectly done, but I just take a little little sheet that I put my cake pan upside down, and then I put the parchment paper over the top of it, and then I just take my scissor, and you know, just like when you're in grade school, right? You want to roughly kind of trace that out with your scissors. It's not going to be perfect like that. I mean, maybe yours will be, but mine never is, and that's okay. We're just lining a cake pan, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Of course, if you don't want to use parchment paper, you don't have parchment paper, whatever, by all means, don't use it. You know, that's up to you. For me, it just really cuts down on the cleanup and the mess, and I'm all good with that. Saving time for me is more time to knit and crochet, and I'm good with that. So, and more time for life in general, right? So we got our little round here. We're gonna put that in our pan. That's pretty good, I think. Better than my first one, that's for sure. So we got that done. So we have our oven on, we got our cake pan lined, we got our baking tray lined. So we got our little saucepan, and we're gonna turn because we're making a caramel sauce, we don't want this super hot, okay? Put my parchment paper away now. So I'm gonna go with like sort of a medium-low heat, and I wonder if I should put my camera, I have like a horizontal tripod. Do you guys want to be on that? Hang on. Okay, I just moved you over so you're above the stove. So we are going to take our 1/4 cup of butter and toss that into our saucepan. Put the rest back in the fridge. And we're gonna let this melt, right? We want this melted. I guess I could have cut that into smaller chunks for us, huh? So it would melt faster. So you don't have to sit and watch my butter melt, or I could have even melted it in the microwave some for us. I could have pre-melted that. Didn't really think this through very well. Haven't made this in quite some time, but that's okay. We're going to use some brown sugar in this sauce. And I'm going to get about, I'm going to say a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. But you can certainly, some people do more. I think it kind of depends on how caramelly and brown sugary you want your sauce. I try to do a 2-to-1 ratio about with my butter and my brown sugar. So if I'm going to do the 1/4 cup of butter, then I'm going to have a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. But you can put more. I've certainly seen some people do more with their brown sugar. So I want my butter to melt a little bit more than that. Before I put my brown sugar in. Guess I could turn my heat up a little bit more. The other thing that we can do is slice our pears. So my pears right now, this is what the pears that I'm using. These are just the Amazon fresh sliced pears in pear juice concentrate. The pears, when they say sliced, it's just a pop top can. They're not very sliced. They're sliced, but they're not sliced into small little slices. They're kind of, they're larger. They're larger slices, right? So we'll take a look at what we have in our can. And I like mine sliced smaller for what we're doing. So, this is the size of the slices. They're maybe like 1/4 or 1/6 of a pear, and we want these fairly thin for what we're doing. We're going to line the bottom of our pan with them. So this is the size. Now I went ahead and sliced those quarters into probably 2 to 3 other chunks for each of those. So that, let me see if I can move that over without, while we're waiting for our butter to melt, right? We can multitask up in here. We can. Okay, well, I went ahead and paused the camera because you don't need to watch my butter melt, right? And finish slicing my pears. I think you know how to do that too. So I did slice my pears to about, maybe 1/4 to 1/2 an inch thick. They are canned pears. I have 1/4 cup of melted butter in here. And now I'm going to add 1/2 cup of brown sugar for my caramel sauce. I like to go about 2 to 1, 2 parts sugar, 1 part butter for my caramel sauce. I have seen some recipes do more sugar than that. Honestly, in my opinion, it gets a little challenging to dissolve if you go much more than that, and it can stay kind of gritty no matter what you do. But of course, you do you. If you really do want more brown sugar in yours, by all means, add more. Just know that it could be difficult to really dissolve that sugar in there, and you might get a little bit of a gritty texture, okay? So I've got 1/2 cup of brown sugar to my 1/4 cup of butter. And now I'm going to add some cinnamon to mine too. We are going to use a spice cake. So if you don't want extra cinnamon in your caramel sauce because the spice cake has enough flavor to you, then you can completely omit the cinnamon. That's not necessary. I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of just plain old cinnamon to this. If you want more cinnamon, of course, you can always add more. If you don't want any, so this is our 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. If you don't want any cinnamon at all, don't add any. If you don't want cinnamon in the cake even, you can make this pear cake, this pear upside down cake with caramel sauce with just a yellow cake mix, okay? You don't have to use spice cake. I like cinnamon in the fall. The flavors of pears and cinnamon and spice cake, all of that just really says fall to me. And so that's why this is one of my favorite fall desserts. But I know not everybody likes cinnamon. Cinnamon can be a strong flavor. So you can omit the cinnamon from the caramel sauce if you want, or you can completely omit it from the cake by using a yellow cake mix and not even using a spice cake mix. So we're gonna stir this really, really good. Like I said, because we want our brown sugar dissolved, we want our cinnamon dissolved, and we don't want that gritty texture. Once you get your sugar in there with your butter though, you really want to attend to this sauce regularly. You don't want to like step away from it because it will burn rapidly. A caramel sauce, butter and brown sugar, it goes from like melted and mixed to burned in a matter of seconds. So it's not something I'd turn my back on personally. I really think you need to stir it pretty constantly and make sure that it's blended without burning. So I'm going to stir. I turn my heat down pretty low, probably to about 1/4 of a turn. I have dials on my stove, so probably about 1/4 of a turn is what we have here, just to make sure it doesn't burn. Tastes good? Okay, I'm going to call that good for our caramel sauce. So I'm going to turn the heat off, and I think what we're going to do is bring you over here to where our pans are. We can bring our pans over there, and I think we'll just bring you over here. Hang on. Okay, and I'm going to bake this cake in 2 round 9-inch cake pans. I'll zoom that out a little bit. 2 round 9-inch cake pans. So we need to divide this little caramel sauce between our 2 pans. And it doesn't seem like very much sauce. And it's not. But the reality is that a little bit of caramel sauce goes a long, long ways. So I'm just going to pour a little bit in the bottom of each pan. I am lining each pan with parchment paper. And I'm also going to line my baking sheets with parchment paper. And I'm just doing that because caramel sauce is messy, right? If this were to burn, I don't think if it runs over, well, it's going to make the cleanup so much easier in the pans by aligning it with parchment paper, because caramel sauce is very sticky. And then I don't think it's going to run over at all, but if it did, it could really burn in your oven and be a real problem. So that's why, for ease of cleanup and just making sure that we don't get spills, we're putting parchment paper on everything. So it doesn't have to be completely covered. If you like more caramel sauce, of course, you could double your recipe. I personally think the cake and the pears and everything is so sweet together that you don't have to completely cover the bottoms of your pans. You just want enough to give it like some flavor. So we're not even going to completely cover the bottom of our pan with that. And you can just kind of swirl it around a little bit in there. We do want to smear this one around a little bit more. I think we can get a little bit more caramel sauce out of our pan. And I think we can get a little bit more out of here. And smear that into our pan. And smear it around the bottom of our pan. It's gonna be thin for sure, I can tell. Even as somebody who can't really see what I'm doing, I can certainly tell that our caramel sauce is gonna be thin, but that's gonna be okay. We just need enough. Like I said, a little goes a long ways when it comes to caramel sauce. It's very, very sweet. So now that we have our caramel sauce in our pan, what we want to do is we want to take our pears. We've sliced our canned pears fairly thin. This is the size of our pear slices. They're maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. So what we want to do now is arrange those in the bottom of our pan in a nice little, I'm hoping this is on camera. I really don't see very much, so it's hard for me to tell. But we just want to make a nice little spiral of pears in the bottom of the pan. I am using canned pears with this. I used to make this with fresh pears all the time. It's a great way to use fresh pears in a dessert. However, you do want to make sure those fresh pears are really, really ripe. Otherwise, they're going to be a little bit tough, even after cooking in the oven, because you don't need to cook this cake for very long. So you definitely want a nice soft pear. So we can put, we got that one done, and then we're going to do one more. We got our other one. So now I'm going to take these pears and make sure I'm on the screen here, and make a nice little spiral in this pan as well with our little pear slices. So we are making another spiral. This is, we're just using a standard spice cake mix out of a box for this. And so your standard cake like that is going to make two 9-inch round pans. So we'll squeeze those in there nice and tight. If you want, you can put a few pear slices in the center there. However, there are other fun things you can do with your center, like put some nuts in there. So we can just put, we got some pecans in here. This is just to say hail maple pecans. We're using maple pecans because that's what we have in the house right now. So we'll just go ahead and put the rest of that package in there. We also have some plain pecans. So we're going to put some plain, just plain old chopped pecans in the center as well, just for a little texture and flavor. I'll put a few more of these plain ones in over here. And you can also put some pecans in around your edges. It depends on if you like nuts or not in your cakes. Now obviously if you have a nut allergy, or if somebody at your family or at your gathering has a nut allergy, then you would definitely want to avoid the pecans and the nuts altogether. And of course, you can eat a few pecans. You can also use walnuts too, right? Or any other nut that you like. So we'll add a few more of these plain ones in here. Okay. And then we're going to put our cake pans aside and out of the way so that we can start working on our cake. So we have our big mixing bowl here, and this is what we're using today. Just a plain old Duncan Hines spice cake mix. It's brand new in the box, and we're going to crack open this box today. We're going to open up this cake mix and hopefully not make a big mess, right? Cake mix bags can sometimes do that. Can sometimes be a little bit explosive when you open them. Okay, so we got a great big metal mixing bowl here, and we are going to put one spice cake mix into the bowl, right? There we go. Okay, now we're going to put in a half a cup of oil. I'm just going to use the exact same measuring cup that I did my brown sugar in. You can rinse it if you want. You know what? It's just brown sugar. As somebody who's visually impaired, I just stick my finger over the top of the cup there so that I will feel the oil when it gets to the top of the cup there. Okay. So now we have half a cup of oil in there. We are going to make this cake just like it says to on the box. We're not going to deviate one bit from the box, which means we need 1 cup of water. I'll be right back. One cup of water. Now I've talked about these Auguson Farm egg products, and that's what we're going to use today. So, to use the Auguson Farm dried egg products, we do have to do some tricky math, right? Because the recipe for the egg powder is 1/3 cup of egg powder, 1/3 cup of warm water equals 2 eggs. And your cake mix wants 3 eggs. So we have to get a little creative, but we are just gonna, this is our little can of the Auguson Farm dried whole egg powder, and we're just gonna scoop out, we're gonna start by scooping out our 1/3 cup for our first 2 eggs. And then to get that second egg, I'm going to roughly do, not quite, I would say, let's see, 2.5, not quite 3 tablespoons maybe. So we're going to do 1, 2, and then maybe like a scant third of a tablespoon, not quite a full tablespoon in there. Okay, and now we need warm water. So for the 2 eggs, we would do 2 or 1/3 cup of warm water to go with the egg powder. And it's the exact same thing, because we don't quite have, because we're not doing 4 eggs or 2 eggs, we have to get a little clever with our math. So I'm going to start with 1/3 cup of water, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the water that I did with the egg powder. I'm going to give it about 1 full tablespoon, 2 full tablespoons, and then a scant third. I assume you guys don't need to watch the water being poured and measured. I better finish licking that caramel sauce off my fork. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, and because this is a glass measuring cup, I can't see the numbers on it. And so otherwise, like a sighted person would probably just measure their water in their glass measuring cup and, you know, add in their egg powder. But I can't see it, so for me, it works way better to use a plastic measure and then add that warm water to my glass measuring cup. Mix the eggs and the powder. Now, you don't actually have to, if you're doing it in a cake like this, you don't have to measure your egg and your water separately. You can just put it in the bowl. I go ahead and do that usually. I know these eggs, I don't think this egg powder looks appetizing at all, but I don't have the ability to drive to the store and get eggs, and I'm miles and miles from a bus stop. So I often don't have eggs in the house, literally for months, right? Months and months and months. And so I do a lot of experimenting with these prepper products to determine, can you bake with them? And you can. Absolutely. I've made cookies with them. I have a cake mix cookie video on my channel. It was disrupted, and I apologize for that. It's a little bit choppy, but you can bake with them. I've baked cookies with them. I've baked cakes with them. All your baked goods turn out just fine made with dried egg powder. They really do. So now we are going to mix this. I just use a fork or a wooden spoon, honestly. It's a cake mix, and it's pretty flaky and it's pretty powdery. If you were going to use a mixer with this, I would definitely start on low, because your cake mix is just gonna fly when you first turn that mixer on. This is gonna be it feels pretty liquidy when you first work with it, right? Between the 1 cup of water, half a cup of oil, and your eggs, feels pretty yeah, it feels like it's not a very thick cake mix. It's not brownies. We're not making brownies or something like that. I just dropped my fork in my cake mix. That's a good one, May, on camera. Okay. So I'm going to stir a little bit more. I can't really tell how much of this powder I've got mixed in. So when in doubt, you just want to stir more, right? When you can't see what you're doing and what's happening in your bowl, the best thing, obviously you don't want to overmix some things, right? There's definitely some things that you really have to be careful about overmixing, and anything with eggs and cake mixes can be one of those. I just dropped my fork again. I'm going to try to wipe off my counter here really quickly because it's kind of messy. getting kind of messy up in here. So I'm going to wipe off my counter here a little bit and bring back my cake pans. And we should have 2 cake pans here with our pears all spiraled in there. So we got 1, and we should have 1 more over here. So what we're going to do now is simply divide our cake batter between these 2 pans, and you just want to, just like any other cake, right? It is hard to tell when you get half. When you can't really see what's happening, it's definitely a challenge to figure out, do I have it in half? And guess what? I oftentimes don't quite get it perfect, and that's okay. So we got 1. We're going to get our second one over here. And I'm happy when I can get the cake batter over the cake pan and not have any major spillage on the counter. That's when I'm happy, even if it's not perfectly divided. Okay. So we are going to okay, so I am just going to keep pouring my batter into this pan, and then we're just going to smear it around. And you want to make sure you get this all the way out to the edges of your pan so that all your pears are covered, right? That's what we're trying to do here. And that's really, if it's perfectly divided or not between pears or between pans, you know, obviously you want it close because they're going to be baking in the oven at the same time. And you would like them to roughly, you know, be done at the same time. But the most important thing, get your pears covered and spread that batter out to the edges of the pan. So there's 1, right? There's 1. We got that one done. We are going to do 1 more here. And I might get out a spatula. That might actually help me out a little bit instead of just using a fork. I know. A spatula. What an idea for me, right? Instead of smearing it around with a fork. That's kind of silly. So, let me go ahead and get my spatula out. And we'll finish scraping up this bowl and getting the rest of our cake batter into the second pan here. It's a little bit tricky. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit tricky to navigate this tripod here. I got my horizontal boom tripod out, got my vertical tripod out, got all the tripods out in the kitchen, and it's a little bit tricky to cook and navigate around them all, but we're making it happen, right, so that you can see the action. Sorry, my floor is getting kind of messy with this whole cooking process. You're probably seeing that get a little cake powder on my floor, on my counters. But we'll get this done. Get our cake bowl scraped out. Okay, I think that's about everything out of the bowl that we can scrape. Well, we might be able to scrape just a little bit more cake batter out of our bowl. We want to maximize that, right? We don't want to waste it. We don't want to just rinse out our cake batter down the drain when we're washing out our bowl. So I'm going to scrape this just a little bit more, and then we should roughly have our 2 pans full, and we should have the cake batter smeared to the edges with yeah, that's mostly what you want, is to make sure that your pears are covered and that your cake batter is smeared to the edges of your pans. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and bake these. I'm going to put them in the oven for 24 minutes, okay? So these pans are going to go into the oven together, and they're going to bake for 24 minutes. And in 24 minutes, we'll check on them and we'll see how we did. I'll be back as soon as we check them in the oven. Okay, y'all, well, the timer just went off. Our cakes have been in the oven for 24 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and take them out, check on them, poke them just a little bit, right? I'll let you see them as soon as I get both of them out of the oven and test them and see if they're done. So I'm going to take off my oven mitts for a minute, poke at them. They feel springy. Okay, so I'll take you off the tripod so that I'll put you on pause. Okay, here are our cakes after being in the oven for 24 minutes. If you've never tested a cake before, one way you can do it is by touching it lightly and making sure that the surface is springy. And these are indeed springy as one. Here's cake number 2. We'll touch that. And the other way you can check on a cake, of course, is to stick a toothpick in and see when it comes out. If you can't see, you can touch if you can see, you'll see if it's crumbs, if it's moist, if it's gooey, or if it comes out clean. If you're visually impaired, just touch the end of it. You'll feel it. If you're touching it, it might feel just a little bit tacky, but there should not be like moist type crumbs on there. So, and don't touch your arms to the pan if you're visually impaired. Okay, so those cakes are done. I'm going to turn my oven off. I'm going to let them cool in the pan for just a little bit, and then we will do the flip, because that's the part of cooking cakes that intimidates most people, especially this kind of cake, getting them out of the pan. Alrighty, I'll be right back. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do that can really intimidate some people about baking cakes is getting the cakes out of the pans, especially with something like this with pears on the bottom. That's part of the reason why we did use parchment paper, so that it's much less likely to stick. A caramel sauce like this could stick anyways, no matter what you do. So I just have regular old dinner plates. Okay, we're using a 9-inch pan. So as long as your plate, you want your plate to be larger than the top of your cake so that it completely overlaps the top of your pans. Now, I did let these cool for 10 minutes, right? They baked for 24 minutes. They cooled for 10 minutes. The cake pans are still very, very hot. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my oven mitts back on just for safety. And then I can grasp, I've got my cake pan here, and I've got a plate on top of it so it completely covers the top of the cake pan. Oh, Alexa, stop timer. Sorry about that. That was my 10-minute timer. Okay, so I'm gonna grasp this together tightly. You wanna grasp this really tightly together, and then you very, very quickly wanna flip it over. You can give it a little bit of a shake if you want to try to make sure you loosen that. Not too hard though. You want to flip it in one swift motion, and then you just want to lift that pan off the top. And then we're going to do the same thing with the next one. We're going to grasp it with plate over the top, and just a swift motion, quickly flip it, give it a nice gentle shake if you want. Set it down on the counter very carefully, remove. There we go. And the parchment paper even came right off of that. Yeah, it's got some caramel sauce on it. Definitely glad I used it. It will be less cleanup for sure. And for the other one, we still got to take our parchment paper off. Okay. Yum. There's some yummy caramel on there. That's some good caramel sauce. Okay. So I will take you off the tripod so that you can actually see the tops of these cakes. Hang on. Let me put you on pause one more time. Okay, here are our cakes. Look at that. This is called pear upside down spice cake with caramel sauce. With each cake mix, you get 2 beautiful round cakes. These cakes are so beautiful and they're so good and they're really not complicated, okay? We use a spice cake mix, a cup of water, half a cup of oil, 3 eggs or your egg powder, a can of pears drained, 1/4 cup of butter, 1/2 cup brown sugar, 1/2 teaspoon cinnamon. That is it, my friends. That's it. Slice your pears first, make your caramel sauce, put it in the pan, right? And you can add the additional pecans if you want. It is a beautiful fall dessert. I know fall gets really, really busy. Like for me, fresh, like, okay, these are canned pears. You can make it fresh with fresh pears. I've done it many times as long as they're very ripe. The canned pears are going to be just fine. So to me, it's September, it's fall, and fall is like pears and cinnamon and spice cake, right? That is all things fall to me. So I know fall gets busy with kids and school, right? And then you've got potlucks and dinners and whatever. So this is a really, really elegant fall dessert that doesn't take, because we're using a cake mix in canned pears, it doesn't take a lot of work as long as you have the time to make the caramel sauce, which doesn't take very long at all. That's it, not high tech and beautiful for fall. So my friends, thanks so much for coming along. Really hope you enjoyed it. I know we'll get back to stitching here real soon, but I just thought this would be something fun to do, something different, and again to show you that if you can't drive and all you have is the dried egg powder in your house, you can absolutely still make, look at that, the cakes rose just fine. Beautiful desserts without having fresh produce in your house and without having eggs. Alrighty, my friends, well, till next time, happy stitching, and of course, happy baking, happy cooking, happy fall. Bye-bye for now.